Colleagues, I rise today to speak to Bill C-317, an act to establish a national strategy respecting flood and drought forecasting. This is a timely piece of legislation put forth by Francis Scarpellegia, MP for Lac Saint Louis, who has been bringing issues of water to the forefront in the other place for the entirety of his 22-year political career, holding the trust and respect of all parliamentarians. I would also like to draw to your attention Dr. John Pomeroy, the Canada Research Chair in Water Resources and Climate Change and Director of Global Water Futures Program at the University of Saskatchewan. His expertise has been indispensable in drafting 317. Senators, many of us will recall the horror of the 2013 Calgary flood, a devastating natural disaster which brought to our attention to the powerful weather events which have become more and more regular across Canada. In a strange way, this terrible event was also a key contributor to the creation of this bill. Dr. Pomeroy was in Alberta during this disaster and testified during the committee in the other place that, and I quote, "It rained for 3.5 days over the mountains just west of Calgary. In June 2013, 250 millimeters fell on a late-lying snowpack, and then the flood started. The source of these floods was the mountains, and they rushed down towards Canmore, High River, and eventually Calgary. 4 people died in that flood. Over $5 billion in damages occurred in that region. It was the most expensive natural disaster in Canada at that time," end quote. I remember at the time speaking to my friend and former colleague, Ted Menzies, who was the MP for McLeod, as he spoke of the shock and desperation put upon the people in his community. There was no timely warning in order to evacuate those residents affected. Interestingly, Dr. Pomeroy had cited that the European Centre for Medium-Range Forecasts was running a test product at the time, which predicted that horrific event 10 days before the Calgary flood. It was not communicated to the officials in Alberta as it was a test, but it does show just what systems are out there which can make a real difference in predicting these natural disasters. Colleagues, more recently, the Standing Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry released a report in October of 2022 which investigated the flooding that occurred in British Columbia in 2021. It's a thorough report and contains several recommendations moving forward to mitigate the occurrence of these floods. Recommendation number 2 advocates for the Government of Canada to collaborate with the Government of British Columbia and other governments in the province and relevant stakeholders to develop a comprehensive plan for flood control in Fraser Valley. This plan should include both a timeline for dike upgrades and the establishment of a committee to examine flood mitigation measures, as well as emergency preparedness and response strategies. That is what Bill C-317 is all about, providing accurate flood and drought predictions which Canadians can rely on, but on a national level. There's a lot at stake. As MP Scarpellegia put in the other place, and I quote, "Canada is the only G7 country and perhaps the only developed country in the world without a national flood forecasting system," end quote. In Canada today, we have 13 wheels steering the flood and drought prediction business. 10 provinces and 3 territories have systems which are developed bottom-up. They work to meet local needs of forecasting, while at the federal level, we have a more complicated system which works top-down. There is very little interoperability and has led to, according to Dr. Pomeroy, a fragmented system which does not meet the needs of the country as a whole. We also have a disparity amongst the quality of systems used from province to province and territory. Some provinces, like Manitoba, which has been dealing with flood conditions for some time, have advanced, capable systems. Quebec as well. But the Yukon, for example, does not have any expertise in this area. Global Water Futures, with the help of Environment Canada, have developed a system for these predictions and has been running this in the Yukon since 2018. Remote communities require assistance as well, and one of the prime motives for this bill is to bring these communities to the table. What C-317 aspires to do is bring all stakeholders together: the federal government, provincial and territorial governments, Indigenous peoples, and academia. We should also keep in mind that we share river basins with the United States, so this is an international issue as well. According to Dr. Pomeroy, and I quote, "A federal, provincial, territorial, cooperative system could far better ensure that resources and technologies are available to support operational forecasting and predictions from these co-developed systems," end quote. This bill would, through the Minister of Environment, Climate Change Canada, in collaboration with the Ministers of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Infrastructure and Communities, Natural Resources and Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, develop a national strategy on flood and drought forecasting to help provide key stakeholders with the information they need to forecast floods and drought. This is envisioned as a collaborative and cooperative approach which formalizes the system in order to make sure that we are all working on the same page, pooling information and best practices, all with the goal of mitigating the effects of floods and drought. This isn't happening at the moment. In 2019, Global Water Futures, again with the help of Environment Canada, met with 13 provincial and territorial forecasters and established an informal working group to share that kind of information. That is still informal and just began, still informal and just began in 2019, should be of concern. Bill C-317 would provide for extensive consultations between the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and representatives of provincial municipal governments, Indigenous governing bodies, and other relevant stakeholders, including universities, civil society, organizations, and industry, including the insurance industry. The latter, the insurance industry, was included in the legislation through a friendly amendment proposed by Michael Cram, MP for Regina, Wisconsin. I see the importance of all these players being at the table in the developing of flood and drought strategy. The inclusion of insurance companies was done for a specific purpose. Certainty is what guides the insurance companies in setting rates. When there is no certainty in predicting floods, it can result in an inability to get a house insured. MP Cramp said at second reading, and I quote, insurance companies have more difficulty predicting floods than other types of weather events, and as a result, they simply do not offer flood insurance to many Canadian homeowners. When damage does occur, government programs such as disaster financial assistance programs dole out billions of dollars to uninsured property owners when there is a flood, end quote. Recently, the Insurance Bureau of Canada announced that the summer of 2024 was the most destructive on record. According to the Bureau, the estimated cost due to severe weather events stands at $7 billion in insured losses. They report that number is 10 times higher than the average $700 million in claims for weather events which occurred between 2000 and 2010 previously. This is an immense rise in claims and clearly tells a story of weather-related disasters in Canada. The Insurance Bureau calls this, and I quote, a whole-of-society challenge and requires all leaders and stakeholders to come together to develop a national action plan to ensure Canada is better protected. We all have a role to play in helping communities plan for and recover from severe weather events, end quote. Colleagues, a report from the Global Commission on the Economies of Water, it stated that the combination of decades of destructive land use and mismanagement of water has collided with climate crisis to put unprecedented stress on the global water cycle. The report distinguishes between blue water, which is rivers and lakes, and green water, which is the moisture stored in plants and soil. The report states that green water is just as important to the water cycle as it returns to the atmosphere when plants release water vapor, which makes up half the rainfall on land. If this trend continues, we will see temperatures rise and in turn see drying out of landscapes, reduction of moisture, and increasing fire risks. Accordingly, the strategy under Section C assesses the need and benefits of national coordination, new investments, and the use of new technologies, assess the need of new modeling, which would identify properties and infrastructure most at risk, assess opportunities to develop national forecasting in order to address the information needs of all stakeholders, and prepare a proposal for the establishment of a cooperative national hydrological and water resource system. Senators, the legislation asks for a strategy to be developed within 2 years and tabled in Parliament. Internationally, this type of system is already in place in Europe, in European countries, and they recognize the importance of such collaborative work. We here in Canada can do the same. As well, the United States has been operating under a similar approach for years. Speaking of collaboration, this bill passed unanimously in the other place. That it did so speaks loudly of the seriousness of the problems we are facing here across Canada. We live in very uncertain times when it comes to our climate and the effects it will continue to have economically in Canada, but it's not just the economic costs that we were thinking about. It was great to see MPs from 4 different parties understand the gravity of the situation and work together to ensure the passage of this bill. For those affected by natural disasters caused by flooding and drought, there is an incredible toll mentally. Community evacuations take very negative toll on all those involved. The fear and uncertainty, the displacement, the reconstruction, and all the issues which accompany such disasters linger. Losing a house or a business, or both, leaves a mark. If we can prevent, at the very least, the loss of lives with this approach, our efforts will be worthwhile. When it comes to Indigenous people, we must understand that government monitoring of floods and drought is sparse. We tend to think more about the cities. With this approach, we can begin to predict flooding in First Nations communities. It's also very important to bring Indigenous knowledge and memory into the strategy. These communities have much to bring to the table. As my friend, Mi'kmaq Elder Albert Marshall would suggest, a tremendous benefit of two-eye seeing. There's been some questions regarding either the country, whether the country needs this coordinated response to changing climate. To my knowledge, weather does not recognize provincial boundaries, and the ability to coordinate across the country when it comes to the prediction of these events naturally involves all players mentioned in the bill. The provinces and territories would benefit from this approach. MP Richard Cannings from South Okanagan, West Kootenay commented in the other place, now in Canada, and I quote, now in Canada, operational flood forecasting is a provincial responsibility, but the rising threats and rising costs call for better forecasting, that we are more coordinated across provincial boundaries. The data that goes into flood forecasting and modeling and drought forecasting must come from multiple jurisdictions, end quote. I'd like to add that a recent NANOS poll, I know that we've been listening to a lot of polls lately, maybe not so much on the weather. NANOS research found that 61% of respondents do not consider the country prepared for the next weather-driven crisis. 75% of respondents also believe that these weather events will get worse moving forward. Many of us seem to be on the same page when it comes to whether these events require action. In closing, I would like to thank those responsible for bringing this bill forward. We are facing unpredictable weather, an unpredictable future weather-wise, costly in terms of people, property, and prosperity. We can work together to prevent much of this harm caused by the changes in our climate, and it's my hope that the coming weather patterns, which have become so devastating, will at very least become more predictable. Preparation is the key. When a flood occurs, Bill C-317 may just give people the time necessary to prepare their properties, their businesses, and their families to mitigate the effects of these extreme weather conditions. Thank you.